Hello, everybody. John Barnwell here, and I'm in Detroit, the Straits, right across from Canada, with all kinds of interesting stuff going on over there that we're not going to discuss today. But I wish everybody the best. I'm here with the Reverend David William Parry out of London, England, merry old England, oft-times merry, sometimes. And this is our 71st episode of What is Truth, in which we attempt to frame a meta-narrative within a cultural milieu and try and leave room for the spirit to express itself within the human domain, which has become increasingly difficult in the modern era due to certain issues that I'm going to approach from my side today. And I'm sure David always has something that's quite, in addition, at times whimsical. So, Reverend David, how are you?
I hope I'm whimsical more than some of the time. Yeah, okay, John. Lots of things on my mind at the moment because I'm probably going to have some of my poetry staged at the Camden Fringe Festival in August. The remarkable Russian director Viktor Sobchak, a good friend of mine for many years, has adapted both of the first collections and made them ready for the stage. But I mean, I can't get excited because of the amount of forms you've got to fill in, which is unbelievable. Why is everything bureaucracy nowadays? Because you've got to deal with the Camden French Festival, then you've got to deal with one of the theatres, and we both decided a pub theatre is probably the best for a launch. People forget that's how Shakespeare basically got the energies flowing. And it's a fine tradition in this country, not marshalling people at gunpoint into a theatre, but having a theatre in a place where they naturally go. But all it means is the paperwork is tripled. I haven't had enough time to even think whether we're coming or going yet. And Victor keeps telling me in his wonderful Russian drawl, everything fine. Everything fine. So I'm assuming it is. So yeah, that's how I am. I mean, yeah, the Straits bit of where you live still worry me, but hey, what can you do? Canada always worries me. I've no idea why. I suppose it's because the Quebecois hate the English so much, although not as much as they hate each other. So that's always amusing. Yeah, I mean, merry. When was the last time old England was old or merry? It's rather like living in 1984. You know, the party has basically dissolved the past and the future, so nobody questions anything. And it's a deliberate policy on the part of the party. Therefore, everything's in a sort of Miss Mel shape now, where it's impossible to frame questions. That's how it feels living in merry old England at the minute. Yeah, one political thing, I suppose I've been amazed at how brass-necked certain British politicians are. As a country, we've hit a new all-time low, which is quite difficult to conceive of. But there we are. So I'm trying to work out what to be merry about. Art, literature, drama, the land of Shakespeare, one of our own. That makes me happy. I've got a lovely cup of hot water in front of me. I've just finished writing the afterword for the remarkable book on the philosophy of education towards an anthroposophical perspective, which has taken me 4 bloody days. How can 3 pages take 4 days? But I wanted to say me piece. So, yeah, I suppose I finished that this morning. I'm feeling relieved, hoping we're not all sort of edging into World War III and keeping my pecker up, as they say. How about yourself, John?
Well, yeah, that's it's like we live in a world full of contradictions. I mean, here you have Neil Young removing his tunes from Spotify, so he won't let them play "Living in the Free World." And but he's owned by a company that's he sold his catalog to a company that actually is owned by BlackRock Partners Inc., which is like right at the core of this whole high strangeness that we've been in for the last couple of years. And so we won't even go there. It's so bizarre. But it's like CIA Inc. And in any regards, and CIA Inc. is like a branch of MI6 anyway, you know. So what does all that mean? I just hoping that there's more good people in the world than bad people at this point, and leave it at that. And so that's why I thought it'd be a apropos time to look at the progress or ingress, perhaps even is more appropriate term at this point, because what we've been going through, and a lot of people are wondering, like, how in the world? Well, essentially, while we were asleep at the wheel, certain forces that are alive and well, as they say, assert themselves more strongly. And so it gives us the opportunity to grow that much more by putting our efforts towards our awakening. And so that's really what's going on from my vantage point, although it's not a lot of fun to watch as our climax events in general. There tend to be no fun, but wisdom is crystallized suffering, essentially. And so unless you can anoint your wisdom with love, what's the point? And so let's look at this and give a larger view, go up to 60,000 feet or what have you, and go and review some of the content that Rudolf Steiner thought was significant. There was a series of lectures that he gave in Copenhagen, and it was just a short series of 3 lectures, but he published it, and I put the link down below. And so if you want to see the text version, or if you want to see the, you can listen to the audio version. But let me look here and see what's happening with that right now. Make sure I get there without having the sound click on. Yeah, all systems go. That's good. Make sure I get there without having the sound. Okay. Yes, and so it's his lectures on Copenhagen on June 6th, 7th, and 8th in 1911. And he went back and he revised them for publication as a book that's published under the name The Spiritual Guidance of Mankind. And so evidently Rudolf Steiner thought that these were important things regarding the work that he was doing. And so it's available there. It's just a little thin book, but it gives you a great deal of content regarding what we're going through, is how it ties into the precession of the equinox ages, you know, of 2,160 years. There's only one point in there that might be a little bit confusing, and it's an interesting point, because in that, it was in, I believe, the 3rd lecture, but Rudolf Steiner makes the point about how as human evolution progressed, it came to a point around 1250 AD. And he said around that time, even the highest initiates were devoid of clairvoyant abilities. And so, and that was a point of severance. It created an opportunity for a man to become a purely earthly being, living in the world of his linear abstract thinking. Now, keep in mind, in the realm of the angels, they don't do that. They don't have that. They don't go through this whole process of one is two and so on, that they have an immediacy by inspiration in which they receive their ideation. That's an important point to make. And so it just humbles you when you realize that you have one of those beings specifically concerned with your well-being. And that's your, what's called in the West, the holy guardian angel. And so that angelic realm is very key at this time in evolution. If you go back to the Atlantean period, some 10 to 15,000 years BC, and then you come into the first period of 2,160 years, Steiner makes the point about that the archive were specifically associated with the leadership that was going on at that time, and that Christ, that they refer to as Vishvakarman, was just beyond their abilities to really come into perception, relationship with. So they referred to that as the architect of the universe, so to speak, which is an interesting concept when you consider the first 14 verses of the Gospel of John, where he's saying, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and that everything was made by the Word, essentially, paraphrasing. And so you see that out of the realm of the archai, which is the beings that are dwelling within the realm in which our spirit man exists. And so and this is way before Vedic scriptures. This is the primal time of the Manu and the seven rishis, and that when the seven rishis would come together, they would receive inspirations for the guidance of their people, and it would come from the region of the spirits of personality, or the archai, the time spirits that are three stages beyond mankind, that they experience the human stage in the old Saturn condition. And that in the next period, the archangels were inspiring the original Zarathustra. Again, this is in the late Stone Age. So this is like way before the Zoroastrian or Zarathustrian scriptures were written down. They were writings that were a result of the kind of codification of the memory of the ancient Persian impulses that came from the original Zarathustra, who described what we call the being of Christ in the aura of the sun as Ahura Mazda. And so he received his inspiration from the realm of the archangels. When we move 2,160 years forward, we come to what he called the Egypto-Chaldean period. Includes the Babylonians and that whole milieu in that Middle Eastern region. And it was their time to be a central focus of human culture and development. And he talked about how during that period of time, the Egyptians themselves had come to a point, and if you go back to the book of Manetho, and he was a Serapian priest who wrote down some of the archival information, and that's how it was passed to the Greeks. But he talked about Menes as being the first of the human kings, that before that they were literally ruled by what they refer to as gods, or what we would know as beings of the hierarchy, and that man had such a strong clairvoyant relationship to the spiritual world that in the earlier archaic ages of ancient Egypt, that they had this divine guidance from spiritual beings, and that when Menes came along, that's when the human rulership began. And of course, with Menes, you say, well, who might that be? And Manetho was in the Ptolemaic period, so it was like in the early 3rd century BC that he wrote this down, and he wrote the book Egyptiaca, which is history of Egypt in Greek, and it's like a really important source for chronology. But in there, he gets down to talking about the first of the human rulers, and that's a real key, because Rudolf Steiner makes the point that yes, his name was Menes, but if you go into the Egyptian sources, you see that Menes is in reference to probably Pharaoh, who is generally considered to be the one who began the dynastic periods, and that's Narmer. And but that Menes, that's a Sejed B name, as they would call it in ancient Egypt. It's a personal or birth name. And so it could be a little confusing, because Menes is like, it's a prefix in a lot of the Egyptian names of the kings. And so you see that there, but it's Menes is like Manes, which is like Manu, which is like Manas. It's that whole idea of the thinking principle. And so just as you enter into the human realm, where it's a human form of thinking that's starting to be involved in the orchestration of culture, that's when the errors begin, because men are dealing again with that whole linearity and that thinking process that the hierarchical beings above us, they don't have to do. They can just, they get it right, because there's this direct relationship to the world of being, so that their whole process is highly different. But as we move into the Egyptian period, you see, and it goes on the decrease, with them receiving the inspiration from the world of the beings one stage beyond us, the realm of the angels. And you have the only beings that were able to incarnate into physical bodies were what you would call the retarded angels, because ordinary, or I shouldn't call them ordinary, but your regular angels don't incarnate in human bodies as a rule. And so you have these retarded beings, and meaning that they didn't complete what would have taken for them to become full angels. That it's as complicated as the population in the city of New York. I hope you realize that. And most of the renditions that you hear discussing angels and demonology and all these things are so simplistic that they won't help you, because it's so much more complex. Because just as in New York, you got good people, you got bad people, you got this guy's bad on Tuesday, this guy's usually only bad on Wednesdays, and then the other days he's a nice guy, and this other guy over here, he's trying really hard, but you know, he falls once in a while. And so you get that kind of unevenness of the way in which you would consider these things. And so consequently, Rudolf Steiner makes the point that it's not enough to be clairvoyant, that you have to garner some initiation knowledge so that you can sort through any experiences that might come to you through your own personal clairvoyant perception. But I just wanted to give some of those seed ideas. I know it's taken a little too long, but you can't simplify these things. I guess that's my point. And so I would hope that you'd avail yourself of the link below and listen to the book, or check it out on the archive, the Rudolf Steiner archive link that I put below. And so this is very much key. And it's also key to unlocking Blavatsky's secret doctrine too, where she talks about the John beings, Jonic beings, which is an Eastern word for angels.
Gosh, yeah, where do I go with that? I thought MI6 was a version of the company, not the other way round. The British Empire's gone, the American Empire rules everything at the moment. So it's very flattering, of course, I'm sure, but I'm not sure that's how the cookie crumbles nowadays. You know, so I don't know who the equivalent of the Governor General is, but I'm sure he's giving orders to us as opposed to the other way around. Angels, yes, I don't know what I want to say to any of that. There's been a fair amount of unwarranted paranormal activity in my present gaff. I know that. Sometimes the normal should be prized a lot more than the paranormal, I suspect. Yeah, I mean, certainly where my partner and I are grounding ourselves more in anthroposophy, possibly due, ironically, excuse me, to us having discovered the remarkable Matthias Di Stefano. What a remarkable guy. I mean, I keep getting the impression, you know, he's the new St. Patrick, he's the new druid coming to tell us old fuddy-duddies that there's a bigger picture all round, by the way. And that's just the impression I get. You know, this new upstart coming out of nowhere and giving us all a talking to. There can be nothing wrong with that. Do I think he's talking the truth all the time? I think he's a very truthful person. That's not the same thing. I think he's telling his truth as far as he understands it, in an honest, engaging, determined, questing sort of way. The minute we turn our back on those attributes, there isn't much hope at all. Therefore, his vision certainly needs to be embraced, not necessarily agreed with, but embraced as indeed anyone trying to walk along that particular path. I just wish he hadn't mentioned The Matrix. It's a movie. It's a movie. I just wish he hadn't mentioned The Matrix. Why does every millennial on the planet need to believe in The Matrix? I did one of these, what they call, what are they? Observations? What are they called? Reactions? Because I just think they're funny. I'm sorry, I think they're funny. Which we put on TikTok. Yeah, I do it because I think they're funny. On TikTok the other day, where we were sort of commenting and all of that, and I got some snotty reply from some millennial telling me what a matrix was, and actually she hadn't got it right, because by the definition she was giving, the word would be creatrix, love, not matrix. Ha 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 ha. And obviously it's a movie. Am I saying knowledge cannot be presented, human knowledge can't be presented as a series of matrices? No, I'm not, and I don't believe I've ever said otherwise. And where would modern economics be without that particular game? You know, razzle dazzle 'em, as the song goes, and you can get away with murder, which of course they're managing to do at the minute. Oh God, what show was that again? What a wonderful show. Anyway, yeah, I mean, if he wouldn't go on about stuff like that so much, and he's clearly, because I looked at the footage again the other day, clearly actually talking about a creatrix, not a matrix. You know, it's crisp, it's original, it's engaging. What a fine young man. We're very blessed to have initiates, questing initiates such as him. Well, I think, you know, anyone that holds back that word from Steiner hasn't really appreciated the immensity of what he's done. You know, there are at least three careers as a full-time philosopher in about half his work. You know, and then being an artist. Yeah, I think we got to really stand back and appreciate what's been achieved. Polymath isn't the appropriate word, or that's the best word. An extraordinarily accomplished individual. In which case, when I hear this type of material, I'm interested, I'm intrigued, in the same way I'm interested and intrigued with Matthias. But nowadays I've got past the stage where it all has to make sense. Surely the point is it doesn't have to make sense to you. It makes as much sense as it can to you at a particular stage. And then you work with the rest and see where it leads you. Certainly, I mean, as I say, I'm back as a member of the Anthroposophical Society in Great Britain. Yes, I know, I've got to pay my dues. I know. I'm a threadbare pastor. Give me a break. I'm working up to it. You'll get your cash. And I've talked my partner into joining too, because it's a wonderful resource. What do I make of all this Atlantean material, angelic material? I think you're in the right, John. It gets immensely complex, and it needs a modern mind like Steiner's to actually put it in a way that moderns need to grapple with, which is, in other words, a matrix, a series of matrices of knowledge, which I think he does. Yeah, I know there's more than one Zoroaster. I think anyone that doesn't know that just doesn't know the tradition. Egypt, of course, is just Egypt, the endless Egypt, the endless civilization, with its heights and its depths. Yeah, I mean, I hope too people can find their ways into that type of knowledge and not take these rather bizarre and juvenile Manichaean attitudes towards it. It's right, it's wrong, it's good, it's bad, it's yes, it's no. I was just about to make a profanity. I'll make it. It's shit or it's sugar. I mean, no. Can we be a bit more adult? Someone of that level of accomplishment. So let's get secular. Someone of that unusual and inordinate level of accomplishment must be taken in a very different way to the one he's being taken at the moment. I mean, what is it happening with me at the minute? I've got a very clear historical view of Blavatsky at the minute, which I wasn't expecting to come to me. The book's brilliant. The book is brilliant. And what Steiner, he's brilliant plus something, because he's making sense of what the West is doing when the West has forgotten how to make sense of what it's doing. We've got to take a step back sometimes in order to go forward. And yeah, I really hope people avail themselves of the link, because I think that's with me. It's like a wonderful meal. You're hungry, but there's a wonderful meal in front of you. So the temptation is to wolf it all down. And then you've got all these different flavors in your mouth, and they don't make much sense until you savor each one in turn. It's, if you stand too close to a painting to see its artistry. Did you see that during the week, by the way? There's been a health warning given in this country for the portraits, the pictures of Francis Bacon, because apparently now people are warned they've got adult content. So, right, which one of the abstracts are we actually talking about? Are we talking about the Pope in drag? Is that the one we're talking about? Of which there's one in the Vatican? How do I know that? Because I saw it when I went there. Or are we talking about the three figures at the base of a crucifixion? He doesn't say the crucifixion. He says a crucifixion, which appear to be his pictorial versions of modern psychology. Look what's happened to us after 2 world wars. So now apparently my favorite group of people on the planet, millennials, need to be warned that they need an adult attitude before they go into galleries presenting this stuff. What are we coming to as a species? But yeah, so if he's got to be taken a step back from, certainly Steiner does. Because, and on the level of art, I mean, I still am in two minds about dance. I've seen, even at a Steiner house in London, I've seen many years ago, I admit that, I've seen some eurythmy performances. it struck me as rather stilted. But was that because the director of that particular performance hadn't actually given it much thought above the colour? There isn't one single director or producer in the world that doesn't think colour is important, but colour isn't the entire performance. And then you think of his sculpting, you think, I mean, the man's an astonishing human being, and we've got to sort of get a more of a historical grip on him. I wish, right, let me put that a different way. When I first went to university, I was, I did, it's called religious studies, but back then it was more like the history of ideas. And we looked at everyone from Thales up to modern people. I'm trying to think of the most modern one we did, up to people like Wittgenstein, from a religious perspective, obviously, because I was doing religious qualifications, secular but religious qualifications. And, you know, I couldn't gel with these giants. You know, oh my God, they've said all this stuff. My head is spinning. So what I had to do was develop a strategy, and I'd go and find books dishing the dirt on them. Like Schopenhauer, you know, had a terrible row with a maid and threw her down a flight of stairs, and she took him to court and she won. Yes, of course she did, because you threw her down a flight of stairs, mate. You know, and he churlish old bastard. I mean, she bought the bullet way before him. Years later, she got some sort of ailment, and you know, passed into glory. And apparently he says in one of his diaries, no, I haven't checked it out personally, but apparently it says she died today. I mean, God's sake, man, give it a rest. So, but I had to know stuff like that before I could approach these titans. And I suspect that's what we've got to do with exceedingly unusual people like Steiner or Blavatsky and so on, particularly because of the subject areas they move into, where it's much more tempting to say no before we say yes, because they're outlining modalities of experience, modalities of knowledge, which simply are way beyond the common, and they may be a lot more than that. You and I both think there is a lot more to it than that. Excuse me. But, you know, back to the secular. If people are aware that it's there and they're not sure how to define it, at least know it's there and try and dialogue with it on some level. Perhaps it's all psychology. Perhaps it's all creative psychology. Perhaps it's all art, you know, but it's there and it's interesting and it's meaningful. So I think we have to take a couple of steps back, possibly to get the frame. You know, if you stand too close to a painting to appreciate the painting, I've done that. Believe it or not, that's what reminded me of Francis Bacon. His use of color is absolutely astonishing, particularly in Three Figures at the Base of a Crucifixion. The way he uses red is one color, right? Until you see the way Francis Bacon uses the color red, then it's a 1,000 different colors. You're going close to see it, then you realize you can't work out what he's doing and you take a step back again. I'm just about to finish, I promise. But, you know, you've got to go in close sometimes to get the brushwork, to get the coloration. But then you've got to come back and think, oh, my heavens, that's mind-blowing. I need to know what I do now. Handing back to you, John.
Well, I think you have to clarify for those in our audience who may not be aware, but there's a painter, a modern painter named Francis Bacon, and that the Reverend David isn't referring to Lord Verulam. I'd love to see some watercolors by Lord Verulam. That would be a very special thing indeed. Yeah, I think, again, the type of thinking that people are using, and by the way, Schopenhauer, that whole event with the maid was much before he came into contact with Indian teachings. By the way, that was very late in his life that they began to have Eastern writings starting to appear in Germany, and but it's interesting because in looking at that, you see there's no provision in the ancient Indian teachings for truly understanding the Christ. And so people stub their toe on that, and they attempt to resolve themselves into sometimes even often almost nihilistic monism of that just we're in a universe of these energy fields. They're always talking about these energy fields and the dimensions, 15 dimensions, and all this complicated mental construct. And it's important to understand that we have a deep and abiding respect for the East, and that they have their own particular way of approaching reality, but that if one needs to come to an understanding of the Christ impulse, you have to go to Christ himself. That's where it begins and ends. And Rudolf Steiner's approach, of course, is that think whatever you like, but if you're going to approach spiritual science, at least give it its due and attempt to understand what he's saying. Whether or not you agree with it almost doesn't matter, because basically, from my viewpoint, for example, these shows that we do, I'm almost more concerned about our audience who's in the next world, that they're attending. I get a larger audience in the next world than I do down here. I get a very small audience. People are too busy with sporting events and video games. But this is something that when you begin to reverently approach spiritual science, it's very health-giving for those who have passed on, and even those who were opponents of your view, because when they come into the next world, they find they are not equipped to face many of the things that they are now confronted with in the next world, because they had a materialistic viewpoint. And that's kind of the point that I was trying to get to, but I was taking too long, because there's so much backstory that's necessary to come to a rightful understanding of these things. But if you go back again to what Rudolf Steiner says, so you have the archive, inspirations for the Old Indian period and the Stone Age, and then the late Stone Age is the Old Persian period, and then you have the Egypto-Chaldean period for 2,160 years, and then it goes into the Greco-Roman period, the period in which Christ incarnated. And it's very interesting what he says, because he says all these beings back up, and that they're on their own. So that's the point at which, that's the turning point of time. They're not receiving specific, except in rare instances, they're not getting the kind of guidance that previous cultures had received. But now that we've entered into the fifth post-Atlantean period, our current age of the consciousness soul, which technically began in 13 AD. Okay, so we've only been into it, we're still just beginning to unfold this, because an age doesn't become a leading impulse until around the past the third into the middle of the age. And so we're not that far into it yet. But what he says about this age, just as in any cycle, you talk about the sevenfold cycle, the fourth period, there's no recapitulation. Like the first is recapitulated in the seventh, and the second is recapitulated in the sixth, and the third is recapitulated in the fifth. So the fifth age, which would be Jupiter evolution in this stage. So you have Saturn, Sun, Moon, Earth, Jupiter, Venus, Vulcan. So Jupiter recapitulates old Moon, and the Venus period recapitulates old Sun, and the Vulcan period, the seventh period, recapitulates old Saturn. So always in a series of seven, the fourth is the one that has no recapitulation. So we're recapitulating the third period because we're the fifth. Okay. And so that's the Egyptian period. That's the Egypto-Chaldean cultural age. And so we have a relationship again renewed with the angelic realm that's there waiting for us. Part of the problem is that there are the beings that didn't successfully succeed at their job during the old Egyptian period. And they're still hanging around and they want to get in the game. And so you have the materialism, the atomism, the atomic theories, and all this kind of mental constructs that are the result of that activity. And Rudolf Steiner says a very interesting thing. He says in the future, they'll have a chemistry and a physics that is from Christ. And it will be very different from this whole mechanistic atomism that we're so exposed to. And so where does one go with that? Well, people don't have sufficient concepts to even begin to wrestle with such an idea, you know, or understanding that what is thought of as an atom is congealed electrical activity of sorts. What does that mean? I mean, and that was actually something that was mentioned by Lord Balfour. He had said that, which is very insightful on his part, which says that a lot of these elites are occultists. They're just not telling you because they want to keep it secret, because that becomes something that they have in their quiver, you know, and that's an unwholesome thing at times, capable. And so when you get into these things, and are you working with it so that you can understand it on a conscious level? And so like a point that we were making in my conversation with Douglas the other day, that everybody talks about enlightenment as if that's the be all end all. And actually, in terms of the spiritual world, that's just the first stage. That's the beginning of that, and that initiation is that which goes beyond that, so that you have the activity that takes place within the realm of manas, which leads to enlightenment. But then you have the realm of the logos and the realm of the Father in the heart. So you have thinking, feeling, and will. And so it's through feeling and will that you're able to insert the love attribute to anoint that wisdom, because it's that wisdom is that manas, yes. And so menes, manu, all this idea of this enlightenment needs to be anointed within the principle of love, and with the concern to carry it forward so that you have a greater concern for that person before you than you do for yourself. And we're obviously not there yet, because we're in the age of the consciousness soul, which in a way is fundamentally antisocial. And so hence, what are we going through?
Well, I think that's a bit too pessimistic. Yeah, I'm sure there are more good people than there are bad people. The trouble is, good people aren't newsworthy in the present system. You know, so it sounds like there are more bad people. And let's face it, the bad people tend to be louder. If you get one actor on a stage who's loud compared to the others, that will be the one that gets all the attention, even though the others might be outing the guy like there's no tomorrow. The trouble is, we don't have a director to say, put a sock in it, love, you're part of a team. Yeah, I mean, we've got to be careful of the so-called realities that the media, including social media, are giving us. It's a rather slanted, you know, one-size-fits-all, reductive materialist, whether they admit it or not, that's what they're doing. Attitude to life, you know, dog eat dog, a misunderstood version of Darwinism, survival of the fittest, and then some. because that's not quite what he said. Yeah, I mean, we've got to be careful of caricatures and giving the caricatures the strength of reality that they don't deserve, as opposed to reality where they came from, which is very different. Do I believe in original sin? It's very hard to believe in sometimes, but I suppose I do. There's a crack in the human condition. There's a flaw that we all somehow inherit, where we can't do the right thing all the time, even when we know it's to our advantage. I find that astonishing. The rhyme of the ancient mariner, which of course is actually about that, the albatross around the mariner's neck. The interesting thing that most people miss in that poem is that, the albatross has landed on his boat and there's no reason at all to hurt the bird. And the mariner does it just because it can be done. Therefore, it's perversity. He did the wrong thing because he could. And what he'd forgotten was the spirit that loved the bird so much wasn't going to rest with that as the last statement in that particular scenario, which is why it hung the albatross around his neck and made it impossible until the end of the poem, where the entire attitude of the mariner has changed. That was impossible to remove. And it was something Edgar Allan Poe, excuse me, said. When American writers get into their rhythm, into their modus, I mean, they're second to none. Not only did Edgar Allan Poe bring European Romanticism to America, but he created American Gothic. And if people don't see that as a gigantic, and he probably did a lot more than that, but two gigantic achievements, they don't know much about art, culture, or the history of literature. In one of his poems, I'm trying to put it out, but it won't come out at the minute. His problem isn't titanic evils. He says basically we all know them and we can all resist them. It's the hinterland. It's between the here and the there. It's what he calls the imp of the perverse. Until we know what that is, until we can deal with it, human betterment won't really take many steps forward. That is a bullseye as far as I can see it. It's not the Adolf Hitler, it's not the Stalin that suddenly run along and change all the rules. Their time is marked from the beginning. It's actually the guy down the road that won't make peace with his neighbors. It's the woman that needs to henpeck everybody because why not? That's really where all this begins. And we've got to start asking ourselves why it begins and never ends. That is the crux to our problems at the moment, although I don't know how we deal with that, because that's a very difficult thing to realize, not only socially and culturally, but in ourselves. In terms of Schopenhauer, my trouble with him, and I think he's an incredible philosopher, a unique philosopher in all sorts of ways, and clearly he believes in something. Some people say they're atheists and you just know they're not, yet says you, because there's obviously something going on there. He, as far as I remember, felt, because you're right, I mean, the Eastern materials had only just started to be translated towards the end of his life and filtering in slowly into Europe. He felt, of course, and he, as far as I remember, in his last years, he had a copy of the Upanishads at his bedside. And the Dhammapada, I think, I can't remember all that. He felt when he discovered that material that what he called the mathematical Schopenhauerian Kantian tradition, make sure you get yourself in there, mate. The mathematical Kantian Schopenhauerian tradition. In other words, the West had met the East. That's what he's getting at. Just say it that way. Don't give yourself a plug. You're writing the book. There's no need to give yourself an extra plug. We all get the idea. We know where you're coming from. So basically, you and Kant have managed to discover what Eastern people are talking about, but you've got mathematics on your side, right? So, okay, right. Yeah, right. So, but, there's some sort of truth to all of that. There's some sort of immensity to all of that. I mean, one of the metaphors that caught my attention was that he felt the great wisdom of the Indo-Germanics. Now, that term means different things to different peoples and different cultures in the same time period, let alone in different historical periods. Therefore, I'm not quite certain what he meant by that, apart from the fact there's a continuation of various ethnicities through time that seem linked, yada, yada. So he thought the great, what he called the mountain of knowledge and experience, the unique mountain of knowledge and experience that came from India, that came from that part of the world, and also have manifested here as, since where they're relatives, where they're cousins, far removed, but where they're cousins, that had somehow resurfaced and vindicated itself. Those are very important ideas that we do need to grapple with. And I can certainly see, to be fair to him, I had ages to think about it. He used to go around saying Christianity could have been presented differently. So he just cannot stand official Christianity. But there are many other people who can't as well. So we'll just take that as read for a minute. So when he's saying things like it could have been presented differently, it's sometimes you get the urge to attack, but sometimes you think, okay, what is someone of that level trying to say? And I think what he's basically hinting at is you could have had Jesus as the wandering monk, the sannyasin, the man of sorrows, which of course is biblical. The world renouncer, that's biblical. You could have presented it all that way. The emaciated mendicant trying to overcome the world, which would have made sense in India just as much as it would here. Now, there's a unique thought, particularly because mainstream Christianity, when it reaches modern India, isn't looked upon well. I mean, we've got to admit that. It behaves badly a lot of the time. That's just a fact. And I used to go to screenings of Indian movies at the School of Oriental and African Studies. I had a friend who was there, the anthropologist Richard Rujley, did some work there. And then, the baddie is always the Christian, and there's always a close-up of the cross before he commits the dastardly deeds. So he's the filmmakers are just shameless there as well. So he's the bounder, he's the swine before he goes off and does the wrong thing. And what are they saying there? They're saying actually things that aren't trivial. Yes, there's a cultural clash. Yes, there's a very different view apparently between Western Christianity and what is understood by the Vedas, by the great mysticisms of India, if you take it in the way that it's promulgated now in the mainstream. So you're looking at a clash of customs, of ethnic groups, of cultural outlooks, of moral outlooks, apparently. And of course, I used to come away from those screenings in those days absolutely mortified. The swines, how can they do that to Christianity? Until I discovered the work of Bede Griffith. Was he a Benedictine monk? And of course, who had tried to not only build a bridge between Christianity and the vastness of the Hindu tradition. I think people get the wrong end of the stick when I'm criticizing Eastern stuff or not sticking up for it enough. Someone said that a couple of episodes ago. You never stick up for it enough. I don't know what enough means. What do you mean I'm not sticking up for it enough? Please tell me. Bede Griffiths, of course, took saffron robes onto himself. He starts explaining the gospel using theological terms from Hindu scripture, and all of it's perfectly legitimate, which he knew. Is there anything new in that vast, hoary old motherland of India? I doubt it. So there are schools of atheism, there are schools of materialism that go back thousands of years, not just a handful of years like in the West. They're in a battle of ideas with the theistic schools, exactly like here, except that they were doing it first a long time ago. And there are schools of idealism, there are schools of existentialism, and there are different views of God, which is why I'm a bit surprised that Hindus can't work out the type of God we're actually talking about. I mean, one of the concepts in India is the Bhagavan, which on a conceptual level is exactly the sort of God we are trying to describe, we are trying to enunciate, we're trying to explain to people, which of course normally comes out in the stories of Krishna. It's not that simple. It's not just Krishna, but Krishna in his human form, in his divine form, certainly would explain why so many Westerners and Western Christians feel at home the minute they're reading the Bhagavad Gita, or the minute they're actually looking at those ideas in a new way. I mean, there's nothing wrong in looking at treasured ideas in a new way. So yeah, the big Griffiths of the world were doing that. There's a necessity sometimes in doing that, and maybe we're not all as far apart as we want to think we are, or have assumed we are. I wonder what Steiner will be thought of in India in 100 years' time if this momentum goes a little further and people actually start talking more instead of sniping at each other. There's an outer surface to things. There's an inner reality, which is always much more complex. I can see a type of Christianity where Jesus, our good Lord, is depicted in saffron robes and talking about renunciation and the love and the wisdom that's behind all things. And that not really doing the cultural violence that so much of mainstream Christianity tends to do in India, sadly. And likewise, without us writing off what they're saying because they're all heathens, without really thinking about what it is they're saying. I think part of the issue here is the imp of the perverse. Full circle. It's much easier to say no than yes. It's much easier not to listen because we're always in the right and everybody else is always wrong. Yes, Bible Belt, I'm attacking you again. And I'm not listening. I mean, one last thing, John. When the perfecti were getting up the nose of the Roman Church, right, so you've got a group of monks talking about peace, love, pacifism, and going around minding their own business. I can't see that as a huge challenge. I'm sorry. One of the advices, you can have that as a plural, given by the Roman hierarchy was don't listen to them. Right, so that's the best bit of advice ever. Right, so you can't hear their insidious teachings on universal love and compassion. So yeah, the imp of the perverse, I'm against it. What do you think, John?
Well, we're back to Neil Young rocking in the free world. Just keep your mouth shut if you want to rock in the free world. Yeah, well, that's the human condition. And that's that linearity of thinking that is so different from the angels who receive their conceptual basis as an inspiration. It just comes and it's always right in the rightful angels, the ones, not the retarded ones. And so, yeah, you get into this, and that was actually the point of separation that happened in the lodge, is that there's the Eastern masters that were dispensing with the type of knowledge that is compatible in the East, and then there's the masters in the West, the master Christian Rosenkreutz and the master Zarathustra, and then you have a master that goes back and forth between the East and West. And so if you're looking at it in our modern age, and that gets back to that relevancy of in 1250 AD, around that time, there was a darkening of clairvoyance. And so that was right in the middle of the great developments within the Catholic doctrine with scholasticism and that whole growth. But at that time, even those who had been high initiates in previous incarnations could only get the faintest relationship to that wisdom that they had once encountered. And there was a severance from the ancient world at that time. And so Rudolf Steiner does make the point is that the fifth post-Atlantean period, in a way, can be seen as beginning from that point, because it was out of that point that now we're gradually evolving, because the fifth post-Atlantean period doesn't really begin astronomically until 1414, 1413. So that's kind of a lead-in, and so it helps you understand that these things are gradual transformative processes. And so you have to be graceful in your considerations regarding what stage we're in. And so, and like this whole thing, like Cliffi insisting that we're in the Aquarian age. Well, no, we're a ways off from there, some more than 300 years away. And so, but nonetheless, there are seeding impulses that happen with that. The Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in early Aquarius did point a seed impulse. And so you have these kinds of intimations, cosmic considerations, and it's that expanding consciousness that's the real issue here, because the thing to understand, and in the East they will perfectly agree with this, is that reality is states of consciousness. It's just that they don't have a provision for the fourth, because in the old Indian period, that wasn't an issue. That was still dwelling outside of man, that impulse of the ego, and even leading up all the way to the mystery of Golgotha. It wasn't an indwelling presence until it came into the mystery of Golgotha, and now you have St. Paul referring to Christ in you. And that's an interesting transitional point. And so ultimately what it will lead to is something that's for the future. And so when you get into the current day understandings of biblical, they don't have a mystery language to decipher it. And as beautiful as the language is in the King James Bible of 1611, it nonetheless it's crafted by Puritans and very, the Anabaptist impulse, and there's a lot of different shared views coming into trying to decipher it. But because of the state of consciousness of the people that were translating it, they don't have access to the types of perspectives that would enable them to understand. Like, I keep going back to the simple word. The word they translate is messenger, that John the Baptist was a messenger. And the word it's angelos, it's referring to an angel, and that there's an angel working through John the Baptist. But they don't say that, see, because their conceptual view doesn't have room for that type of an understanding. Again, going back to Jesus confounding the elders at the temple, the word there is kuriotetes. And kurios is like, kurios is translated as Lord. Well, what does kurios mean? It's referring to that divine Christ impulse that's an indwelling presence, the Christ in you. And that's that aspect over which we have to be humble, because we're nowhere near and fulfillment of what that will mean as we move into the future. And David disappeared. I hope he doesn't fall down the elevator. He's on a little mini vacation there. There's his hotel room, you see, with all those curtains. So he's done a curtain call, and that's quite all right. So if we get into this, you have to give people a lot of latitude as far as what they're capable of understanding. And so Christianity, as viewed from spiritual science, is not something that you proselytize, because to be perfectly honest, the person has to be desirous of putting the effort into it to be able to even come to an understanding, and that doesn't work out when you're in these polemics, So anthroposophists tend to avoid argumentative discussions about Christology and all of that. That's okay. It's something that's to be approached reverently, and so you'll find that there's Rudolf Steiner's books can be found. A dear friend of mine, he got into Rudolf Steiner because his mother found Steiner books in the Catholic seminary. I mean, they're out there, and Catholic priest once said to him, "Well, yeah, the Rudolf Steiner's works are for the adult Catholics," which is interesting. And so, it's not for everybody, and that's okay. Because in getting into, you have to have a sensitivity towards what time it is. And in understanding this timeline that Agatha is referring to, yes, that's a very important point, because that's how you can understand the mystery of evil. It has to do with, yes, Steiner was raised Catholic. He was an altar boy, but he was in a free-thinking household. His parents, they were more interested in science, and he was never really exposed to that much of liturgical trappings, whatever, other than being an altar boy. That was more of a social event. And so that's why it was so remarkable for him when he, around 1899, at the end of Kali Yuga, the Christological world opened up to him. And then in retrospect, he looked back on scripture and he came to the conclusion that everything in it's correct. It's just that in what way? And that's the point, is that he saw that there's a definite missing element in the way in which people are, or elements plural, because there's so many facets to it. It's something, scripture's largely for the future, because we don't have the conceptual basis at this point to be able to come to it on its own terms. And that's the challenge. And so it becomes an artistic thing. And he continually makes reference, for example, to the Gospel of Mark as being artistic treatment. And so you look at it, and like some of the things like Jesus walking on the water, as it's sometimes treated as a figurative analysis, or that there were actually rocks under the water. It's just they couldn't see them, and other people that think, oh well, it was an optical illusion, and they try to explain these things away because in their worldview they have no conception of the possibility of that type of an event happening. And so that's the materialism in which they dwell. It's their problem. It's not Scripture's problem. It's their problem. But it's Scripture's problem from the standpoint of translation, and it's linguists' problem from the standpoint of their understanding of selective choice of words as far as translation is concerned. And so we don't have the same relationship to language that people of the ancient world did. Look at ancient Egyptian, and you look at hieroglyphics. What happened? Like you can go back to, for example, there's a reference that my friend Brian Lynch. Hi, Brian, if you're out there. And he used to make reference to a clay tablet from it was Babylon, or I think it was Sumerian, and it's referring to him reading the text and hearing it all around him. So I don't know many people that describe having that type of an experience when they read a scripture, as hearing it resounding around them. And so it's a different consciousness in which we're dwelling. And so we've given up the perception of the spiritual world through the astral. And now we're moving in, starting from around 1250, and then 1413, 1414 into the consciousness soul period, to where we transform the consciousness soul into the spiritual soul. And we're in the early stages of that, but basically what we're looking at is the transformation of the astral through the vehicle of the ego. And that this is the key, because in the past, the astral world was the vehicle of consciousness in which we had our relationship to reality. But now we're moving to where it's the ego. The Christ in you is going to be the central focus of consciousness. And we're taking baby steps at this point. Your Kyrios, your true ego, your higher ego, that part of you that doesn't incarnate, that is there attending to you along with your guardian angel. So there's a great many beings that are going to a great deal of trouble on your behalf. And so let's have a little bit of respect for these beings. And it's wonderful that we can get together like this, discuss these things, and I hope that it's helpful for those across the threshold. And there's been a rash of that lately, and that's unfortunate. It's very unfortunate. But like Rudolf Steiner said, death is like taking off a raincoat. You take off your raincoat when you get inside and you go into the next room. But we have a very dramatic relationship to the mystery of death. And that's due to the nature of our consciousness more than anything. And that's why one of the reasons why ancient warriors were so brave. We'd even think of them as being foolhardy, because they knew better. They knew that there wasn't the end, it was just a transition. And so in getting to an understanding of transitions, that's the threshold. And we go into it, the mini threshold, every night. We go into the realm of the angels, the archangels, and the archai, and then come back. But what I'm pointing to with Kyrios, it's a higher level even than that, because when you get into the transformative experience of your relationship to your higher being, then you start getting into the beings, the higher level of being that was involved with you before you knew that you were you, before your oldest memory. And that's that, except ye be as little children, you shall not enter the kingdom of heaven.
You'll have to forgive my dash away from camera. I think it was explained. Calls of nature happen to everybody, even the most gloriously justified. So, oh my God, now John's doing it. That's even more worrying, because he knows I panicked on the screen. What do I do? I talk about, I suppose, something to do with Catholicism. I mean, certainly as an independent Catholic, don't panic me. I just get panicked when that happens. I couldn't help what the chemicals were telling me to do. I thought I was completely under control, but there we are. Yeah, I mean, Catholicism. I technically am an independent Catholic. I've explained that before, I hope. I hope, of Antiochian succession. Independent Catholics tend to see themselves as at slight odds with Romans, with Roman Catholicism, and we tend to see ourselves, I did say the word we, I did say the pronoun we, as one of the corrective forces at work within the great body of Christ known as Catholicism. We do tend to see ourselves as sort of putting the record straight and extending arguments and expanding arguments and trying to say, well, no, I mean, you've gone along the wrong route there as far as we can see it, and this is why, and this is what we've got to do. I also notice, I keep saying there's a Protestant deep in me. There is. I mean, I'm some sort of nascent Pentecostal. But I've noticed, I mean, there may be a merging of those things. I've just discovered charismatic Catholics. So who knows? There may be a merging going on. I don't know. For me, Catholicism isn't one thing, and it never was. It's sort of all sorts of things, and I find that quite natural and quite healthy. I mean, just because a few canonists in Rome want everybody fiddling to their tune is neither here nor there, and they've got away with that far too often for far too long. What was it? The Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, the Inquisition, in other words. No. Discuss, don't persecute. But does that reflect the nature of Catholicism, or does it reflect the nature of the time when all that started? I suspect the latter is actually the case, when people thought in terms of rigid hierarchies, feudal elites with the trickle-down effect. There were times when what the king said was the truth of the tribe. You did not have your own opinion. You had to think what the king thought. You had to have the religion that the king had. There wasn't a choice. People tend to forget the brutalities of the past. It's not wise to be too romantic. Were there some wonderful things? Yes. Were there some great things? Of course. Do we throw out the baby with the bathwater and forget tradition over your dead body? But let's not get too carried away. They didn't get everything right. They made lots of mistakes. We're getting back to that theme of this today's discussion, John. They wouldn't discuss things. Not really. I'm right, and you're going to listen to me. I mean, the trial of Maimonides, the great Jewish mystic and philosopher, is nearly a litmus test to everything that came afterwards. So what, I can't remember, was it not the Benedictine, was it, I can't remember which monk it was, what order he was from. Dominican, was it the Dominican? Who's not winning the argument, against this great genius. So his day job is what we'd call a chemist, I suppose, an apothecary, but he's also an acknowledged genius in philosophy. So this other guy's losing the argument, so he decides to pull out one of the old stock tricks from theatre, rushes up to Maimonides, throws himself on his knees and begs him to become a Christian and see sense. Why can't you stop all this wickedness, you bastard? Because you're winning this argument. All that has to stop. All that has to stop. The trouble with Catholicism is its age. It's reflected the time period it's been in, because what else can it do? Century after century after century, and it tries to hold up maybe a mistaken type of idealism. All the different hierarchies reflect the different angelic orders and so on and so on. Yes, but no. Yes, but no. Yes, but no. That if that's misunderstood, you very easily end up in all sorts of trouble. So what's the plus side of all that? The minute you realize Catholicism is many things in many hearts and many minds, everything begins to calm down again, and you get a more beautiful picture. Why am I saying all of that? Because I can very easily understand why, a mature priest would say to somebody, Steiner's works are for adult Catholics. That makes total sense to me. I can really understand that. Not denying mystical Christianity, and who is the best advocate and exponent of that in our particular time? Steiner. Not to say there aren't other people, but again, the man's prodigious outpouring on its own puts him in a unique category. Regarding the rest, gosh, I wish we could get on with the Age of Aquarius. I'm getting quite teed off with what's going at the minute. I've got all these astrologers. Yes, I hang out with astrologers, telling me roughly what you've just said. Oh, we're in difficult ground at the minute. Right, yeah, okay, I understand that. What can we do, please? It's all these old energies are at work and the new ones are just coming in. Yet, no doubt. What can we do, please? And I suppose millennials are the worst example of a generation caught in the middle. And all right, let's be fair to them for a change. And the best. What is so wrong with young people wanting resolution to a series of problems, which with a little bit of goodwill and a little bit of common sense and a great deal of work ethic could have been sorted out centuries ago. But the will wasn't there. There are too many people in plumed hats giving each other medals and taking all the glories. I mean, if there is going to be a war, I don't think there is, and I pray there isn't. You know, all right, who's making money? I mean, let's not you know, flatter any of the players at the moment on either side. Who is making money out of this? Because that's what happens during a war. Certain people make a great deal of money and go to their little island retreats while the rest of the plebs, you and me included, are fighting to the death in trenches. You know, so let's be a little more adult. And yeah, millennials, you're a pain in the arse, but don't stop. You've got a beautiful vision. You've got a vision of the world as it should be a bit more. Yeah, I sort of like what the priest said. I'd like the idea behind, because you get all the paranormal and supernatural stuff in charismatic Catholics, and you get the doctrines, you get the liturgies. I notice my academic work at the minute is becoming more liturgical. I'm not quite sure why. It's interesting you picked up something telepathically there. I'm saying lots about liturgy at the minute. I don't know why. Colours and beautiful things. Perhaps that's it. Perhaps that's me being a puff. I don't know, but colours and beautiful things. If it was good enough for Noel Coward, it's good enough for me. We need new attitudes, a breath of fresh air. We need to appreciate that you don't have to throw out the baby with the bathwater. You can keep all the doctrines of dogmas. I've never been a fan of dogma. Question everything. But the immediate experience of knowing Christ as your personal confederate, that is mind-blowing. If you have both of those things at the same time, it seems to have started when a group of Catholics, I can't remember the university offhand, I think it was in Canada, please someone correct me because I can't remember, went to a Pentecostal revival, I think that's how all this started, and actually experienced a personal interaction with Christ. That for me is the coming in of a new energy. That for me is coming in as an inspiration from the future. And what you said earlier struck me as very similar to something Chuck Missler said. I mean, he was, let's face it, I mean, an incredibly accomplished man in his own right, very narrow on certain issues, but a man worthy of huge respect. Saying that any sensible, any mature reading of the scripture realizes it's a coherent information system. I believe his PhD was not only in engineering, but information systems. Again, someone could correct me on that. I know he worked as an engineer with his own company most of his life. And if you see it as an integrated information system, then it has to be from outside time, because some of the things are saying, it's saying belong to the future, and we've got to sort of work into them. Therefore, what you were saying not so long ago makes reminiscences, makes reverberations between you and Steiner and Chuck, which again strike me as the incoming of Aquarian forces. And if some people don't like it being put that way, that's okay as well. But, you know, I don't want to write off the wisdom of the human race. I don't. After all, it was 3 astrologers that found our good Lord. Before the shepherds, whatever that story means. And, you know, it was that, there's another story there. And Jehovah's Witnesses find that a problem. I find that a revelation. You know, I mean, let's look at what these influences are as they come through, because it won't be this, at least I hope it won't, this sort of cataclysmic Planet of the Apes, you know, Charlton Heston on his knees and the Statue of Liberty coming out of the sea behind him. I mean, I hope it's not that. You know, it won't be this, everything finishes and then everything begins. It will be something much more subtle and gentle. You know, there'll be wars and rumors of wars, but that won't be the end. It's sort of the birth pangs of what comes next. And let's try and see to make sure it doesn't get to that forced birth, that cesarean amongst births. You know, let's try and work out what the influences are. For me, I suppose, as I say, finding 2 of my own personal passions and character attributes married in something that the Catholic Communion has never done before, and that allies it in with the whole of the Pentecostal, the renewal movement. That's the Aquarian influence. And if we start looking at it that way, then surely the priest is proved right, and the whole of Steiner's corpus is for mature Catholics. What do you think, John?
Well, you have to give space for freedom, and that's the key. It's that Rudolf Steiner makes the point over and over again. The mission of Earth evolution is the developing of mankind into the spirits of freedom and love. And so, I mean, what does that mean? And you could spend a great deal of time, a lifetime, thinking about what the implications of that could be. And so with that, we cannot forget to extend our appreciation to my continuing sponsors of this event. I guess this is an event. Tyla, Vadim, and Vivian, and then for the others that have contributed in the way in which they can. And any contribution is very, very helpful to keep this thing rolling along. And there's the paypal.me / I don't have David's thing, but it's what D Parry 777 is what it is, isn't it? paypal.me / D Parry 777, and mine is paypal.me / John Barnwell 888. And so if you want to buy us a cup of coffee, it's greatly appreciated. And David has 3 books: The Grammar of Witchcraft, which is not a grimoire, it's a Shakespearean study. And his second book is Caliban's Redemption, his Shakespearean-esque poetry, some of which is being converted into a play, which is wonderful indeed. And his major thought work, Mount Athos Inside Me, Essays on Religion, Swedenborg and the Arts, edited by the talented Daniela Irendust. And those are all available on Amazon. And for those of you that don't know, I'm the author of 2 books. The Arcana of the Grail Angel is 640 pages. The Spiritual Science of the Holy Blood and of the Holy Grail, a study developed out of the work of Rudolf Steiner of the underground streams of esoteric Christianity, which flowed from the Brotherhood of the Holy Grail to the Order of the Knights Templar and the True Rosicrucian Order. And it has a forward by my best friend Douglas Gabriel from American Intelligence Media, and a great many diagrams and references. And that whole series of diagrams is reproduced in my second volume, plus I added a great many more. And so you can get into some of the deeper levels of what we're attempting to approach here in our conversation. These are both available on eBay if you're in the continental US. If you're outside, you can contact me through the academia link below or through private message on Facebook. And I think I covered everything. I didn't forget. And we're right on schedule here. And so if David would like to share any final thoughts and lead us in some form of prayer to consecrate this moment for us.
Well, at the risk of turning this episode into a glee club, I'm truly honoured to have you as a friend, and I'm not just buttering you up, although you will be receiving the manuscript of my 4th book at the end of February, and you did agree to write a foreword, so that's on air now. Ha! So I think it's finished by then. It's been a total beast of a book. I can't wait for it to finish. It's that book or me, and it's not going to be me. But you should be receiving it then. Don't want to say more than that at the moment, apart from the fact it has a strong anthroposophical theme. But I'm honoured to have you as a friend, and I'm getting used to sort of American counterculture through you and all the people that you've mixed with and known. I think it's wonderful. I'm hoping to know Douglas Gabriel better because I know he's part and parcel of all of that. But, you know, a new network of friends is never something to be sneezed at. And that for me is the Aquarian influence. It's the new coming into our lives in a positive and revealing and opening way. My friends, it's my privilege. We could all say prayers, but it's my privilege to be able to say a few words to round up the show until we meet again. What I want to do today is pray using Psalm 143. Would you bow your hearts just for a few moments as I recite the words? Brethren, let the morning bring me word of your unfailing love, for I have put my trust in you. Show me the way I should go, for to you I entrust my life. That's what people mean by faith. It's not about swallowing doctrines and dogmas alone. It's about a relationship with yourself, what's best in you, and those light powers that made us all. Be at peace, be happy, and may we all be able to meet again next Sunday. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you very much, my brother. And thanks everybody for showing up, and for those of you that watch this on the replay, thank you very much. And don't forget to click like on the video. I guess that's supposed to be helpful. And subscribe to my output, and there's other things that come up. Thank you very much.